The wedding of Katherine Howard, the rise and fall of Henry VIII's fifth queen. Katherine Howard, a vivacious 19-year-old brunette, captured the aging King Henry VIII's attention at a time when his confidence and vitality were in decline. She was the niece of Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, one of England's most prominent Catholic peers. Norfolk, a seasoned political operator, saw Katherine as the perfect pawn in his ambition to re-establish Catholic influence at court. By positioning her to catch the king's eye, Norfolk and his faction sought to improve the reformist Protestant influence that had grown under Thomas Cromwell. Their gamble paid off spectacularly, for Henry quickly became infatuated with the young Katherine, who represented everything he craved in a queen: beauty, charm, liveliness, and the perceived innocence of youth. By the summer of 1540, Henry's fourth marriage to Anne of Cleves had been annulled, a humiliating debacle that left the king eager for a new beginning. Katherine Howard, with her flirtatious demeanour and youthful energy, was a stark contrast to Anne, whom Henry had famously found unattractive. The wedding, officiated by Edmund Bonner, Bishop of London, took place only 19 days after the dissolution of the king's marriage to Anne of Cleves. On the 28th of July 1540, the same day Thomas Cromwell was executed for treason, Henry married Katherine in a secret ceremony at the Palace of Oatlands in Surrey. Edmund Bonner, Bishop of London, officiated the intimate event, and for 10 days the marriage was kept under wraps. After this time, the marriage was announced in the usual way for the most of king's weddings. The bride was presented openly at court and prayed for during Mass across the country. Like with Anne Boleyn and Jane Seymour, King Henry attended the Chapel Royal at Hampton Court for the occasion. He had used Greenwich Palace for Catherine of Aragon and Anne of Cleves. This time, there was no dramatic walkouts during the Mass, unlike when people were abruptly asked to pray for the king and his wife, Queen Anne, instead of Queen Catherine. However, there were murmurs of discontent. Many English people preferred Anne of Cleves as a suitable queen over this new, young bride, though they weren't willing to resist openly. After the announcement, the king and his new queen embarked on a honeymoon progress, essentially a hunting trip through Surrey and Berkshire. They stayed in Reading before heading north. On their way back, they spent time at the moor with members of the King's Council. During this trip, official letters were carefully labelled to reflect whether they came from the council at court or the council in London. During the journey, the king adopted a stricter daily routine, which some, like the French ambassador, believed was an effort to lose weight. He rose between 5 and 6 a.m., attended Mass by 7, hunted early in the morning, and returned by 10 for dinner, spending his afternoons on royal business. By October, when the court returned to Windsor, Henry declared himself a new man, claiming that his leg no longer pained him, but sadly for the king, this improvement wouldn't last long. Henry, almost 50 years old and struggling with declining health, wanted time alone with his bride before presenting her to court. The aging king was besotted, convinced that Catherine was the embodiment of all the virtues he valued in a woman. He showered her with jewels, gowns, and titles, eager to display his prize to the world. For a time, Henry appeared rejuvenated, buoyed by the belief that he had found the perfect queen to restore his happiness and vitality. When Catherine was finally introduced as queen, she brought a sense of youthful exuberance to the court. She danced, sang, and charmed those around her, earning the nickname the Rose Without a Thorn from her adoring husband. Henry, now obese and plagued by a chronic ulcerated leg, revelled in her attention and doted on her incessantly. To him, she was a symbol of renewal, a balm for the failures of his previous marriages. And yet, while Henry basked in the glow of his bride's beauty and cheerfulness, Catherine's feelings about the marriage are less clear. She found herself bound to a man old enough to be her grandfather, whose physical condition was far from appealing. Despite her outward compliance, it is likely that Catherine, with her youthful passions, struggled to adapt to the demands of being married to such a domineering and troubled king. Unknown to Henry, Catherine harboured a scandalous past that would ultimately seal her fate. Before her marriage, she had engaged in sexual relationships with two men, her music teacher Henry Mannix and Frances Dereham, a courtier who had served in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. Both relationships were widely known among those who had lived in the Duchess's household, but the details were carefully concealed from the king. In 1541, whispers of Catherine's indiscretions began to surface. John Lascelles, a reformist with ties to the Protestant faction, brought forward testimony from his sister, Mary Hall, who had served in the Duchesses of Norfolk's household and knew of Catherine's past. The allegations reached Archbishop Thomas Cromwell, who reluctantly informed the king. Henry, initially incredulous, demanded a thorough investigation. As evidence of Catherine's premarital liaisons came to light, it was also revealed that she had resumed contact with Frances Dereham after her marriage. Worse, she had allegedly begun an adulterous affair with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the king's privy chamber. Letters between Catherine and Culpeper suggested a passionate and illicit relationship, further fueling Henry's rage. Henry was devastated. His belief in Catherine's purity had been shattered, and the betrayal cut deeply. In a rare display of emotion, the king reportedly broke down in tears during a council meeting, lamenting the loss of the woman that he adored. At one point, he called for a sword, declaring his desire to personally kill her for her treachery. His anger, however, soon gave way to the cold pragmatism of a ruler who cannot tolerate dishonour or disloyalty in his queen. Catherine was arrested and interrogated, though she denied consummating her affair with Culpeper. Both Culpeper and Dereham were tortured and eventually executed, their heads displayed on London Bridge as a warning to others. Catherine's downfall was swift. In February 1542, she was brought to the Tower of London to face her fate. Too young and inexperienced to navigate the treacherous politics of the court, she lacked the allies or influence needed to save herself. On the 13th of February 1542, she was executed at the Tower Green. Before her death, she reportedly asked for the block to be brought to her so she could practice placing her head upon it, demonstrating a dignity that belied her youth. Katherine Howard's brief tenure as queen was marked by both joy and tragedy. For Henry, her betrayal was a bitter blow that left him disillusioned and further isolated. The tragedy of Catherine's execution lingered in the court's collective memory, a casting shadow over Henry's later years. Though her reign was short and her influence limited, Catherine remains a poignant symbol of youth and innocence, consumed by the ruthless demands of Tudor politics. For Henry, her death marked the loss of his final chance at romantic happiness, leaving him embittered and resigned to his declining years.